The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Elena Rodriguez wiped down the mahogany piano for the third time that evening. Her reflection stared back from the polished surface, showing tired brown eyes and calloused fingers that had once danced across these very keys with the grace of a professional. Now those same hands spent their days scrubbing floors, emptying trash bins, and enduring the cold stares of executives who barely acknowledged her existence at Meridian Financial Group. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Elena had been working as a night custodian at Meridian Financial for 8 months now, ever since her world had crumbled around her. The 40-story glass tower in downtown Chicago housed one of the most prestigious investment firms in the Midwest, where million-dollar deals were struck daily and where people like Elena were invisible. She preferred it that way. The less attention she drew to herself, the better. The executive lounge on the 35th floor was her least favorite place to clean. Not because of the work itself, but because of the beautiful black Steinway grand piano that dominated the corner of the room. According to the building directory, it had been donated by the company's founder decades ago and was meant to provide a cultured atmosphere for client entertainment. In reality, it served as an expensive piece of furniture that collected dust and reminded Elena of everything she had lost. She had tried to avoid looking at it during her first few weeks on the job, but that had proven impossible. The piano seemed to call to her, its ebony surface gleaming under the recessed lighting like a siren song from her past. Sometimes, when she was certain the building was empty, Elena would lift the fallboard and run her fingers silently across the keys, feeling the familiar resistance of the ivory beneath her touch. She never pressed down hard enough to make sound, terrified that someone might hear and discover her secret. Elena's story was one of dreams deferred and harsh realities. She had graduated summa cum laude from the Chicago Conservatory of Music 5 years earlier, where she had been the star pupil of the prestigious piano program. Her professors had predicted a brilliant future for her, with talks of concert halls and international competitions. She had been accepted to pursue her master's degree under the tutelage of renowned pianist Dr. Victoria Ashworth, an opportunity that would have opened doors to the most elite circles of classical music. But life had other plans for Elena Rodriguez. 3 weeks before she was supposed to begin her graduate studies, her younger sister Maria had been diagnosed with acute lymphoblastic leukemia. At 19, Maria was Elena's only family, their parents having died in a car accident when Elena was 22 and Maria was just 14. Elena had raised her sister while putting herself through college, working multiple jobs and taking out substantial loans to cover both their expenses and her tuition. When Maria got sick, Elena faced an impossible choice. Her sister needed immediate, intensive treatment that would require someone to be with her constantly. The experimental therapy program that offered Maria the best chance of survival was not covered by their basic insurance plan. Elena could pursue her musical dreams and potentially lose her sister, or she could sacrifice her future to save the only family she had left. The choice had been easy, even if it had broken her heart. Elena withdrew from the graduate program, forfeiting her deposit and disappointing Dr. Ashworth, who had personally vouched for her admission. She sold her prized 1943 Steinway baby grand piano, the one her parents had saved for years to buy her for her 16th birthday. The money from the sale, combined with her college savings, had been just enough to cover Maria's treatment and living expenses for the first year. For 3 years, Elena had worked whatever jobs she could find that offered flexibility and health insurance. She had been a waitress, a retail clerk, a receptionist, and a dozen other things that paid the bills but slowly chipped away at her soul. All the while, she watched over Maria's recovery, celebrating every small victory and enduring every setback. The good news was that Maria had beaten the cancer and was now a healthy 22-year-old college student. The bad news was that Elena had accumulated crushing debt and found herself completely disconnected from the music world she had once inhabited. At 28, Elena felt ancient in musician years. Her technique had deteriorated from lack of practice, her connections in the classical music world had withered, and her confidence had evaporated. The dream of becoming a concert pianist seemed as distant as the stars she sometimes watched from her tiny studio apartment window. The custodial job at Meridian Financial wasn't glamorous, but it paid better than most of her previous positions and offered decent health insurance. The work was solitary, which suited Elena's current state of mind, and the overnight schedule meant she rarely encountered the building's high-powered occupants. She preferred it that way, invisible and forgotten, just trying to make enough money to pay down her debts, and maybe, someday, figure out what came next. As Elena finished cleaning the executive lounge, she couldn't resist one last look at the Steinway. The piano sat there in majestic silence, its music rack empty, its bench pushed neatly underneath. Elena wondered when it had last been played, if anyone in this building even knew how to play it, or if it was destined to remain a beautiful but silent decoration forever. She was about to turn away when she heard the elevator doors open down the hall. Elena's heart jumped into her throat. It was nearly midnight, and the building should have been empty except for security. She quickly gathered her cleaning supplies and headed for the service elevator, hoping to avoid whoever had arrived so late. But as she rounded the corner, she came face to face with the last person she wanted to see. Vincent Blackwood, the CEO of Meridian Financial Group. Blackwood was a man who commanded attention even when he wasn't trying. At 45, he was tall and imposing, with silver hair that was always perfectly styled and cold grey eyes that seemed to look right through people. He wore expensive suits that probably cost more than Elena made in 6 months, and he carried himself with the arrogance of someone who had never been told no in his entire life. Elena had seen him from a distance several times during her months at Meridian, usually striding through the lobby with an entourage of assistants and lawyers trailing behind him. She had heard the stories about him from other employees, stories about his explosive temper, his impossible demands, and his particular talent for humiliating people who displeased him. The turnover rate in his executive assistant position was legendary, with most people lasting less than 6 months before they either quit or were fired. Now standing in the hallway with her cart full of cleaning supplies, Elena felt completely exposed under his penetrating stare. She was wearing her standard custodial uniform, a navy blue polo shirt with the cleaning company's logo, and matching pants that had seen better days. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and she wore no makeup. She looked exactly like what she was, a working-class woman trying to make an honest living, and she could see the dismissal in Blackwood's eyes as he took in her appearance. "Who are you?" Blackwood asked, his voice sharp and demanding. "Elena Rodriguez, sir. I'm with the cleaning crew." Elena kept her voice steady and professional, though her heart was racing. "It's after midnight. Why are you still here?" "I work the overnight shift, sir. I clean the executive floors between 11 p.m. and 7 a.m. Blackwood looked her up and down with obvious distaste. Elena could practically see the calculations running through his mind, categorizing her as someone beneath his notice, someone whose opinion didn't matter, and whose presence was merely tolerated as long as she remained invisible. "Well, make sure you stay out of my way," he said dismissively. "I have work to do, and I don't want to be disturbed by your noise." "Of course, sir. I'll be very quiet." Blackwood walked past her toward his corner office, and Elena breathed a sigh of relief. She had managed to avoid any kind of confrontation, and with luck she wouldn't encounter him again. She continued with her cleaning routine, working her way through the remaining offices on the floor while trying to put the uncomfortable encounter out of her mind. But 20 minutes later, as she was vacuuming the hallway outside Blackwood's office, she heard shouting coming from behind his closed door. The sound was muffled, but she could make out fragments of what sounded like a very heated phone conversation. Words like incompetent, disaster and fired carried through the expensive wood door. Elena tried to ignore it and focus on her work, but the shouting continued for several more minutes before suddenly stopping. A moment later, Blackwood's door flew open, and he stormed out, his face red with anger. He was speaking rapidly into his phone, his voice tight with barely controlled fury. "I don't care what time it is in London," he was saying. "Wake him up. Tell him if he doesn't have those documents on my desk by morning, he can start looking for a new job." Elena kept her head down and continued vacuuming, hoping he would pass by without noticing her. But instead, Blackwood stopped directly in front of her and gestured impatiently for her to turn off the vacuum. "You," he said, pointing at Elena. "How long have you been working on this floor?" "About 40 minutes tonight, sir. But I've been cleaning this floor for several months. Have you ever seen anyone using the piano in the executive lounge?" The question caught Elena completely off guard. Of all the things she had expected him to ask, that wasn't one of them. "No, sir. I don't think anyone's played it since I've been here." Blackwood's expression darkened even further. $40,000 for a piano that no one even touches. Typical waste. He looked at Elena with sharp eyes. "I suppose you've never played piano either. Probably can't even read music." The dismissive comment hit Elena like a physical blow.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
She felt her cheeks burn with shame and anger, but she forced herself to remain calm. This man had no idea who she was or what she was capable of, and she intended to keep it that way. "No, sir," she lied smoothly. "I wouldn't know the first thing about playing piano." "Of course not," Blackwood said with satisfaction. "Well, that's going to change. I'm hosting a client dinner next Friday night, and I need someone to play background music during the cocktail hour. Someone sophisticated and talented who can impress some very important people." Elena felt confused. "I'm sorry, sir, but I don't understand what that has to do with me." "It doesn't have anything to do with you directly," Blackwood said impatiently. "But I need you to make sure that piano is in perfect condition for the performance. Get it tuned, polished, whatever it needs. The musician I'm hiring is extremely particular about her instruments." "Yes, sir. I'll make sure it's taken care of." "Good. And let me be very clear about something." Blackwood stepped closer, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper. "That piano is worth more than you'll make in 5 years of cleaning floors. If you so much as touch the keys, if you leave so much as a fingerprint on the fallboard, you'll be out of this building so fast your head will spin. Do I make myself understood?" Elena felt anger flare in her chest, but she swallowed it down. "Perfectly clear, sir." "Excellent. Now get out of my sight and let me work in peace." Elena gathered her cleaning supplies and moved on to the next section of the floor, but her hands were shaking with suppressed emotion. The casual cruelty in Blackwood's voice, the way he had automatically assumed she was too ignorant and low class to understand music, the threat delivered with such cold satisfaction, it all brought back memories of every slight and dismissal she had endured over the past few years. As she worked, Elena found herself thinking about the piano and the performance Blackwood had mentioned. She wondered who he had hired, whether it was someone she might have known from her conservatory days. The thought of hearing live classical music again, even if she had to experience it while emptying trash cans in the background, sent a complicated mix of longing and pain through her chest. For the rest of her shift, Elena tried to push the encounter out of her mind and focus on her work. But when she finally left the building at 7 a.m., walking out into the grey Chicago dawn, she couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had just changed. Blackwood's casual threat echoed in her mind, along with his assumption that someone like her could never understand or appreciate classical music. As Elena rode the bus home to her small apartment, she stared out the window at the city waking up around her. Commuters hurried past on the sidewalks, their faces set with determination and purpose. They all seemed to know where they were going and what they wanted from life. Elena envied them their certainty. She thought about Maria, who was now thriving in her senior year at Northwestern University, studying to become a teacher. Elena's sacrifice had been worth it. She knew that without question, Maria was alive and healthy and building a bright future for herself. But Elena couldn't help wondering what her own future held now, that her sister no longer needed her constant care and support. The debts were still substantial, but they were manageable with her current job. Maria would graduate in the spring, and hopefully find a good teaching position. For the first time in years, Elena was starting to think about what she might want for herself, instead of just focusing on survival and taking care of others. But every time she tried to imagine a different life, a better life, she came back to the same painful reality. She was 28 years old with no recent performance experience, no professional connections, and no money to invest in rebuilding her musical career. The classical music world was brutally competitive, even for young, well-connected graduates. For someone like Elena, who had been out of the game for years, the barriers seemed insurmountable. The bus reached her stop, and Elena climbed off into the cool morning air. Her neighborhood was a far cry from the gleaming downtown towers where she worked. The buildings were older and shabbier, the streets lined with small shops and cafes that catered to working-class families and struggling students. But it was home, and Elena had learned to find beauty in unexpected places. As she climbed the 3 flights of stairs to her studio apartment, Elena could hear music coming from various units. Mrs. Chen in 2B was playing her morning Chinese opera records, while the college students in 3A had their stereo pumping out something with a heavy bass line. Music was everywhere in Elena's world, just not the kind she had once dreamed of making. Elena unlocked her door and stepped into her small but tidy apartment. The space was barely 400 square feet, with a kitchenette along one wall, a fold-out bed that doubled as a couch, and a small desk by the window where she paid bills and wrote letters to Maria. The only decoration was a framed photograph on the desk showing Elena and Maria at Elena's college graduation, both of them beaming with pride and hope for the future. Elena looked at that photograph every morning when she got home from work, and every morning it reminded her of who she used to be and who she had hoped to become. The young woman in the photo looked so confident, so ready to take on the world with her talent and determination. Sometimes Elena felt like she was looking at a stranger. After changing out of her work clothes, Elena made herself a simple breakfast of toast and coffee and sat at her small table by the window. From here she could see a slice of the city skyline in the distance, including the top floors of the Meridian building where she had just spent the night cleaning. Somewhere in that tower, Vincent Blackwood was probably still working, making deals and issuing orders to people who existed solely to serve his vision of success. Elena wondered what it would be like to have that kind of power and certainty, to never doubt yourself or question your place in the world, to assume that everyone around you existed primarily for your benefit and convenience. It must be a strange way to live, she thought, but probably a comfortable one. As Elena finished her breakfast and prepared for bed, she found her thoughts returning to the piano in the executive lounge. She had been cleaning around it for months without really allowing herself to think about what it represented. But Blackwood's comments had stirred something up in her, a mixture of anger and longing that she had been trying to suppress for years. Elena pulled out her laptop and, almost without thinking, found herself searching for information about the upcoming performance at Meridian Financial. She wasn't sure what she was looking for, maybe just curiosity about who Blackwood had hired for his client dinner, but what she found made her heart skip a beat. According to a brief mention in the business section of the Chicago Tribune, renowned pianist Catherine Morrison would be performing at a private event hosted by Meridian Financial Group. Elena knew that name. Morrison was only a few years older than Elena and had been something of a rising star when Elena was still at the conservatory. She had won several prestigious competitions and recorded 2 well-received albums of contemporary classical music. Reading about Morrison's success filled Elena with a complex mixture of emotions. Pride in a fellow musician's achievements, admiration for Morrison's talent and persistence, but also a sharp pang of loss for what might have been. Elena could easily imagine an alternate version of her life, where she was the one being hired to perform at exclusive corporate events, where her name appeared in newspaper articles, and her recordings were praised by critics. But that version of Elena existed only in her imagination. The real Elena was a night custodian, who lied to her boss about not knowing how to play piano, who hadn't performed for an audience in years, and who spent her nights cleaning the offices of people who looked right through her, as if she didn't exist. Elena closed her laptop and climbed into bed, pulling the covers up to her chin. Outside her window, the city continued its relentless rhythm of commerce and ambition, of dreams pursued and dreams deferred. Somewhere out there, Catherine Morrison was probably preparing for her performance, practicing scales and rehearsing pieces that Elena had once played with equal skill and passion. As Elena drifted off to sleep, she found herself thinking about Blackwood's warning about the piano. "Touch my piano, and you're fired," he had essentially said, though his actual words had been more sophisticated and threatening. The casual assumption that someone like Elena would never understand or appreciate classical music had stung more than she cared to admit. But what bothered Elena most was not Blackwood's prejudice or cruelty. What bothered her was the realization that in many ways, his assessment was accurate. She had become someone who cleaned around beautiful things without being able to touch them, someone who existed on the margins of a world she had once hoped to inhabit as a central figure. Elena fell asleep with the sound of the city humming in her ears and dreams of music floating just beyond her reach, like notes played in another room that she could hear but never quite grasp. She didn't know it yet, but her encounter with Vincent Blackwood had set in motion a chain of events that would force her to confront everything she had given up and everything she might still become. The next few days passed in Elena's usual routine of sleep, work, and the mundane tasks of daily survival. But something had shifted inside her since her encounter with Blackwood. She found herself paying closer attention to the piano during her nightly cleaning rounds, noticing details she had previously tried to ignore. The way the light from the hallway reflected off its polished surface, the precise positioning of the bench, suggesting that someone had once cared enough to place it just so. The faint layer of dust that had accumulated on the music rack, evidence of its long silence. On Wednesday night, Elena arrived at work to find a piano tuner working on the Steinway. She watched from a distance as the elderly man made minute adjustments to the instrument, his practiced ear detecting variations in pitch that would be imperceptible to most people. Elena found herself holding her breath as she listened to the isolated notes he played, each one ringing clear and true in the empty lounge. "Beautiful instrument," the tuner said, noticing Elena watching from the doorway. "Shame it doesn't get played more often. These old Steinways are meant to sing, not sit silent." Elena nodded politely, but didn't trust herself to speak. The sound of the piano being tuned had awakened something in her chest, a yearning so sharp it was almost painful. She busied herself with cleaning other areas of the floor until the tuner finished his work and left, but she could still hear the memory of those perfect notes echoing in her mind. Thursday brought a flurry of activity to the executive floor as preparations began for the following evening's client dinner. Elena watched from the background as catering staff arrived to discuss menu details, florists delivered elaborate arrangements, and Blackwood himself made several appearances to inspect the progress and bark orders at various vendors. Elena noticed that Blackwood seemed even more tense and demanding than usual. She overheard fragments of phone conversations that suggested the client dinner was particularly important, involving investors from overseas who could make or break a major deal for Meridian Financial. The pressure was clearly getting to him, and his already short temper seemed to be fraying further with each passing hour. Late Thursday night, as Elena was cleaning the conference room adjacent to the executive lounge, she overheard Blackwood on another heated phone call. This time, however, the conversation seemed to be about the musical entertainment for the following evening. "What do you mean she's sick?" Blackwood's voice carried clearly through the thin walls. "The dinner is tomorrow night. I have 200 people coming, including the Yamamoto group from Tokyo. This cannot be happening." Elena paused in her work, straining to hear more of the conversation. "I don't care about your other clients," Blackwood continued, his voice rising. "Catherine Morrison committed to this performance 6 weeks ago. If she's too sick to play, then she needs to find someone to replace her, someone of equal caliber." There was a long pause during which Elena could imagine the person on the other end trying to explain why finding a replacement pianist of Morrison's quality on 24 hours' notice might be impossible. "That's completely unacceptable," Blackwood finally said. "Do you have any idea what's riding on tomorrow night? These investors are expecting a sophisticated, cultured evening. They're expecting to hear world-class music, not some amateur fumbling through simple melodies." Another pause, and then Blackwood's voice turned deadly quiet. "Let me make something very clear. If you can't deliver a suitable replacement, Meridian Financial will never use your agency again, and I'll make sure every other major corporation in Chicago knows exactly how unreliable you are." Elena heard the sound of a phone being slammed down, followed by a string of profanity that made her wince. She quickly gathered her cleaning supplies and moved to a different part of the floor, not wanting to risk being in Blackwood's vicinity when he was in such a volatile mood. But as she worked, Elena couldn't stop thinking about what she had overheard. Catherine Morrison was sick and couldn't perform. Blackwood was desperate to find a replacement pianist for his crucial client dinner. And somewhere in the back of Elena's mind, a tiny impossible thought was beginning to form. Elena tried to push the thought away, telling herself she was being ridiculous. She was a custodian, not a professional musician. She hadn't performed for an audience in years. Even if she still possessed the technical skills to play at that level, which was doubtful, she would never have the courage to put herself in such a vulnerable position. But the thought persisted, growing stronger with each passing hour. Elena found herself mentally cataloguing the pieces she used to know by heart, wondering if muscle memory might carry her through a performance if she had the opportunity. She thought about the beautiful Steinway sitting silent in the executive lounge, waiting for someone to bring it to life. Most of all, she thought about Blackwood's casual dismissal of her abilities, his assumption that someone like her could never understand or appreciate classical music. Part of her wanted to prove him wrong, to show him that talent and passion could exist in unexpected places. But a larger part of her was terrified of what would happen if she tried and failed. As Elena finished her shift and prepared to leave the building, she made a decision that surprised even her. Instead of taking the elevator down to the lobby, she walked back to the executive lounge and stood in front of the piano. The instrument gleamed in the soft lighting, its fallboard closed and its bench positioned precisely underneath. Elena looked around to make sure she was alone, then slowly lifted the fallboard and exposed the keys. They were beautiful, the ivory worn smooth by countless hours of playing, the black keys standing out in stark contrast. Elena placed her hands in position above the keyboard and felt a familiar sense of coming home. Very quietly, so quietly that the sound would barely carry beyond the lounge, Elena pressed down on middle C. The note rang out clear and perfect, the result of the tuner's careful work the day before. Elena's heart raced at the sound, but she couldn't stop herself from playing a simple C major scale, her fingers automatically finding the correct positions. The scale was tentative and careful, but it was music. For the first time in years, Elena was making music instead of just listening to it or remembering it. She played the scale again, then tried a few simple chord progressions, building confidence with each note. Elena lost track of time as she played, her fingers gradually remembering patterns they had practiced thousands of times in her student days. She moved from scales to simple melodies, then to fragments of pieces she had once known by heart. Her technique was rusty and her timing uncertain, but the basic skills were still there, buried beneath years of neglect but not destroyed. It was only when she heard the elevator doors open down the hall that Elena realized how long she had been playing and how much danger she was in. She quickly closed the fallboard and grabbed her cleaning supplies, her heart pounding with a mixture of exhilaration and terror. She managed to slip into the service elevator just as she heard footsteps approaching the executive lounge. As Elena rode down to the lobby, she realized that everything had changed. She had touched the piano despite Blackwood's explicit threat. She had made music again after years of silence, and most importantly, she had proven to herself that Elena the musician wasn't completely dead, just sleeping. Now the question was what she was going to do about it. Elena spent Friday morning lying in bed, staring at the ceiling and thinking about the impossible decision that lay before her. In less than 12 hours, Blackwood would be hosting his crucial client dinner, still without a pianist to provide the sophisticated entertainment he had promised his guests. And Elena possessed the skills that could solve his problem, if only she had the courage to reveal them. The rational part of her mind listed all the reasons why approaching Blackwood was a terrible idea. She was a custodian, not a professional performer. She hadn't played for an audience in years and had no idea if she could handle the pressure. Even if she managed to play well, Blackwood would probably be furious that she had lied to him about her abilities. She could lose her job, her health insurance, her steady income that Maria was still partially dependent on for her final semester of college. But another part of Elena's mind, a part that had been silent for too long, was whispering different arguments. She had been a talented musician once, good enough to win competitions and earn a place in one of the country's most prestigious graduate programs. Her fingers had remembered more than she had expected during her brief session with the piano. And Catherine Morrison, the pianist she was considering replacing, was accomplished but not superhuman. Elena had played pieces of equal difficulty during her conservatory years. More than that, Elena realized she was tired of being invisible, tired of being dismissed and underestimated. Tired of pretending to be less than she was in order to fit into other people's assumptions about who she should be. Maybe it was time to remind the world, and herself, that Elena Rodriguez was more than just a night custodian with a mop and a cart full of cleaning supplies. By early afternoon, Elena had made her decision. She spent several hours practicing on an old keyboard she borrowed from her neighbor, working through pieces she remembered from her student days and trying to shake the rust off her technique. Her fingers felt stiff and uncertain at first, but gradually the familiar patterns began to return. Muscle memory was a powerful thing, and Elena's muscles remembered more than her conscious mind had dared to hope. At 4 o'clock, Elena called the Meridian financial offices and asked to speak with Vincent Blackwood. She was transferred to his assistant, a nervous-sounding young man who informed her that Mr. Blackwood was in meetings all afternoon preparing for the evening's dinner. "This is about tonight's dinner," Elena said, trying to keep her voice steady. "It's about the musical entertainment. I may have a solution to his problem." There was a pause, and then the assistant asked her to hold. Elena waited for what felt like an eternity, her heart pounding and her palms sweating as she wondered if she was making the biggest mistake of her life. Finally, Blackwood himself came on the line, his voice sharp with impatience. "Who is this, and what do you want? I'm extremely busy." "This is Elena Rodriguez, sir. I work on the custodial staff at Meridian Financial, the cleaning woman. What could you possibly have to tell me about tonight's dinner?" Elena took a deep breath and jumped off the cliff. "I overheard your conversation last night about Catherine Morrison being unable to perform. I know you're looking for a replacement pianist, and I'd like to offer my services." The silence on the other end of the line was so complete that Elena wondered if the call had been disconnected. When Blackwood finally spoke, his voice was cold with disbelief. Are you completely insane? You told me yourself that you don't know the first thing about playing piano. I lied, Elena said simply. I'm a graduate of the Chicago Conservatory of Music with a degree in piano performance. I've performed professionally, and I can provide the kind of sophisticated musical entertainment your guests are expecting. Another long silence, and then Blackwood laughed. It was not a pleasant sound. This is rich, he said. The cleaning lady thinks she can step in for one of the city's most accomplished classical pianists. Tell me, Elena, which pieces were you planning to play? Chopsticks. Mary had a little lamb. Elena felt anger flare in her chest, but she forced herself to remain calm. I was thinking Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor, Debussy's Clair de Lune, and perhaps some Rachmaninoff if the audience seems receptive to more challenging pieces. The laughter stopped abruptly. Elena could practically hear Blackwood's mind working, trying to reconcile his assumptions about her with the knowledge she had just displayed. You're serious, he said finally. Completely serious. I understand you're in a difficult position, and I'm offering a solution. Give me 15 minutes to audition, and if I'm not good enough, you can go back to trying to find someone else. There was another pause, and Elena could hear muffled voices in the background as Blackwood apparently consulted with someone else. Fine, he said finally. Be here at 6 o'clock. But let me be very clear about something, Elena. If this is some kind of joke, if you're wasting my time when I have 200 important people arriving in 3 hours, I will not only fire you but ensure that you never work in this city again. Do I make myself understood? Perfectly clear, sir. I'll see you at 6. Elena hung up the phone and immediately began to second-guess her decision. What had she just done? In less than 2 hours, she would be sitting at that beautiful Steinway, trying to prove to one of the most powerful men in Chicago that she deserved to be taken seriously as a musician. If she failed, she would lose everything. But if she succeeded, she might just reclaim a part of herself that she had thought was lost forever. Elena spent the remaining time getting ready with the same care she had once devoted to preparing for important performances. She showered and styled her hair, then put on the only dress she owned that was appropriate for a formal event, a simple black cocktail dress she had bought years ago for her college graduation ceremony. She applied makeup carefully, trying to project the confidence and sophistication that would be expected of a professional musician. As she prepared to leave her apartment, Elena caught sight of herself in the mirror. The young woman looking back at her was a far cry from the custodian in the navy blue uniform who had been dismissed so casually by Vincent Blackwood just a few days earlier. This woman looked poised, elegant, and ready to command attention. Elena hardly recognized herself. The taxi ride to the Meridian building passed in a blur of nervous anticipation. Elena's hands were shaking slightly, and she had to consciously control her breathing to keep from hyperventilating. She kept running through the pieces she planned to play, mentally rehearsing every phrase and transition. She had chosen repertoire that showcased different aspects of her abilities while staying within the bounds of what she felt confident performing after years away from serious practice. The lobby of the Meridian building was already bustling with activity when Elena arrived. Catering staff were setting up for the evening's dinner, florists were making final adjustments to elaborate arrangements, and men in expensive suits were directing the proceedings with military precision. Elena felt completely out of place among all the wealth and sophistication, but she forced herself to walk confidently to the security desk and announce her appointment with Vincent Blackwood. The elevator ride to the 35th floor felt like ascending to her own execution. Elena's heart was pounding so hard she was sure everyone in the building could hear it. As the floors ticked by, she tried to center herself the way her old piano teacher had taught her before important performances. She focused on her breathing, on the music she was about to play, on the feeling of her fingers moving across the keys. When the elevator doors opened, Elena was surprised to find Vincent Blackwood himself waiting for her. He was dressed in an impeccably tailored black tuxedo that probably cost more than Elena's annual rent, and his silver hair was styled to perfection, but his grey eyes were hard and skeptical as they took in her appearance. "Well," he said, without preamble, "you certainly look the part. Let's see if you can play it." Elena followed Blackwood through the corridors she had cleaned countless times, but everything looked different from this new perspective. Instead of pushing a cart and trying to remain invisible, she was walking beside the CEO as an equal, or at least as someone whose abilities were about to be evaluated. The transformation was surreal and terrifying. They entered the executive lounge, and Elena saw that several other people were already there. She recognized Blackwood's assistant and what appeared to be the catering manager, along with two other men in expensive suits who had the look of important clients or board members. All eyes turned to Elena as she entered, and she could see the surprise and skepticism in their faces. "Gentlemen," Blackwood said with a slight smirk, "I'd like you to meet our potential entertainment for this evening. Elena Rodriguez, who assures me she can provide the same caliber of performance we were expecting from Catherine Morrison." One of the men, a distinguished gentleman with white hair and kind eyes, stepped forward with a surprised expression. "Rodriguez. Elena Rodriguez. Surely not the Elena Rodriguez who won the Midwest Young Artists competition 5 years ago." Elena felt her cheeks flush as all eyes in the room turned toward her with renewed interest. The distinguished gentleman was still staring at her with recognition dawning in his eyes, and she realized there was no escaping the truth now. "You know her?" Blackwood asked, his voice sharp with surprise. "Indeed I do," the older man replied, extending his hand toward Elena. "Dr. Harold Pemberton, Chicago Symphony Orchestra. I was one of the judges at that competition." Miss Rodriguez gave an absolutely stunning performance of Liszt's Hungarian Rhapsody No. 2. It was one of the most memorable performances of the entire competition. Elena shook his hand, feeling both pride and embarrassment wash over her. "Thank you, Dr. Pemberton. I remember you as well. You gave very encouraging feedback that day." Blackwood looked between them with growing confusion and what might have been anger. "Wait just a minute. You're telling me that my cleaning woman is some kind of accomplished musician?" Dr. Pemberton raised an eyebrow at Blackwood's tone. "Vincent, I think you might want to reconsider how you refer to Miss Rodriguez. She was one of the most promising young pianists I've encountered in decades. What have you been doing since then, my dear?" Elena felt the weight of explanation pressing down on her. "Life took some unexpected turns, Dr. Pemberton. I had to step away from performing to take care of family responsibilities." "How tragic," Dr. Pemberton said softly. "But talent like yours doesn't simply disappear. Are you ready to return to music?" Before Elena could answer, Blackwood interrupted with obvious irritation. "This is all very touching, but I have a dinner starting in 2 hours and I need to know if we have entertainment or not. Can you play tonight, or can't you?" Elena looked at the beautiful Steinway grand piano that dominated the corner of the lounge. The instrument that she had cleaned around for months, that she had touched so briefly the night before, now represented either her salvation or her destruction. She walked toward it slowly, feeling every eye in the room following her movement. "May I?" she asked, gesturing toward the piano bench. Blackwood nodded curtly. "That's why you're here." Elena sat down at the bench and adjusted its height slightly. She placed her hands on the keys and felt the familiar weight and resistance of the ivory beneath her fingertips. For a moment, she closed her eyes and tried to transport herself back to her conservatory days, when music had been her entire world and performing had felt as natural as breathing. When she opened her eyes, Elena began to play Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, 9 No. 2. She had chosen this piece carefully, knowing it would demonstrate her technical ability while showcasing the lyrical, expressive qualities that had always been her strength. The opening melody flowed from the piano like liquid silk, each note perfectly placed and shaped. As Elena played, she felt the familiar transformation that had always occurred when she performed. The nervous, uncertain custodian disappeared, replaced by a confident musician who understood her craft at the deepest level. Her fingers moved with increasing assurance across the keys, finding the subtle dynamics and phrasing that brought the music to life. The room had fallen completely silent, except for the sound of the piano. Elena could sense the attention of her audience, but instead of making her nervous, it energized her. This was what she had been born to do, what she had trained for years to achieve. The music poured out of her with an emotional intensity that surprised even her, as if years of suppressed artistic expression were finally finding their voice. When Elena finished the nocturne, she immediately transitioned into the opening of Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor, the piece she had mentioned to Blackwood on the phone. This was a more challenging work that would really test her technical abilities and musical maturity. The ballad began quietly, almost hesitantly, before building to moments of tremendous power and passion. Elena had always loved this piece for its narrative quality, the way it seemed to tell a story without words. As she played, she found herself thinking about her own story, about the dreams she had abandoned and the sacrifices she had made. The music became a vehicle for all the emotions she had been carrying for years, the loss and regret and longing transformed into something beautiful and meaningful. The technical demands of the ballad were substantial, requiring rapid scales, complex rhythms, and dramatic dynamic contrasts. Elena's fingers flew across the keyboard with precision and grace, tackling passages that would challenge even seasoned professionals. She could feel her muscle memory returning in full force, her hands remembering exactly how to shape each phrase and navigate each difficult transition. As the piece built toward its climactic section, Elena played with an intensity that filled the entire room. The piano responded magnificently to her touch, its rich tone projecting every nuance of her interpretation. She could see from the corner of her eye that even Blackwood was leaning forward in his chair, completely absorbed in the performance. The ballad concluded with a series of powerful chords that rang out in the suddenly quiet room. Elena held the final chord until it faded completely, then slowly lifted her hands from the keys. The silence that followed was profound and loaded with meaning. Dr. Pemberton was the first to speak, his voice filled with wonder. Extraordinary. Absolutely extraordinary. Miss Rodriguez, you play with even more maturity and depth than I remember. Your technique is flawless, but more importantly, your musical understanding has deepened considerably. The other men in the room nodded in agreement, their expressions showing genuine admiration and respect. Elena felt a surge of pride and relief wash over her. She had done it. She had proven that Elena the musician was still very much alive, but when she looked at Vincent Blackwood, his expression was unreadable. He sat in his chair staring at her with those cold grey eyes, and Elena couldn't tell if he was impressed, angry, or simply calculating his next move. Well, Blackwood said finally, his voice carefully controlled, that was certainly unexpected. Dr. Pemberton turned to Blackwood with enthusiasm. Vincent, you have no idea how fortunate you are. Miss Rodriguez could perform at any concert hall in the world. Having her play for your clients tonight will be an extraordinary treat for them. Yes, Blackwood said slowly. I'm beginning to realize that. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city below. Miss Rodriguez, may I ask why you chose to work as a custodian when you clearly possess talents that could earn you a much more lucrative living? Elena felt the weight of judgment in his question, but she answered honestly. My sister was very ill and needed expensive treatment. I had to give up my musical career to support her and make sure she got the care she needed. And now she's healthy and almost finished with college. I've been trying to figure out what comes next. Blackwood turned back toward her, and Elena was surprised to see something that might have been respect in his eyes. I see. And you've been cleaning offices at night to pay off medical bills, among other things, yes. Blackwood nodded slowly. Dr. Pemberton, would you mind giving me a moment alone with Miss Rodriguez? The other men filed out of the room, Dr. Pemberton pausing to whisper to Elena, whatever he offers you, my dear, Remember that you have options. That performance was world-class. When they were alone, Blackwood walked back toward the piano where Elena was still sitting. His expression was thoughtful, and when he spoke, his voice lacked the cold arrogance she had grown accustomed to. I owe you an apology, Elena. I made assumptions about you based on your current job, and those assumptions were clearly wrong. Elena was so surprised by the apology that she almost didn't know how to respond. Thank you, Mr. Blackwood. Please call me Vincent. I think we can dispense with formalities at this point. He sat down in one of the leather chairs facing the piano. I have a proposition for you. Elena waited, unsure of what was coming next. Obviously, I'd like you to perform tonight. Based on what I just heard, you'll provide exactly the kind of sophisticated entertainment my guests are expecting. But I'm also thinking about something more long-term. What do you mean? Meridian Financial hosts events throughout the year. Client dinners, board meetings, fundraisers. We could use someone with your talents on a regular basis. Someone who understands both music and business, who can provide the kind of cultured atmosphere that impresses our international clients. Elena felt her heart racing. Are you offering me a job? I'm offering you a partnership of sorts. You would continue to work with us, but as our cultural consultant and resident musician, you'd plan musical programming for our events, perform when appropriate, and help us create the kind of sophisticated image that attracts high-end clients. The offer was more than Elena had dared to hope for, but she found herself hesitating. What about the custodial work? Vincent smiled, and for the first time since she had known him, it was a genuine expression. I think we can find someone else to clean the piano. Elena laughed despite herself. I'd need to think about it. This is all happening very quickly. Of course, but Elena, let me be very clear about something. What you just played was exceptional. Dr. Pemberton was right when he said you could perform anywhere in the world. Don't let anyone, including me, convince you to settle for less than you deserve. Elena was quiet for a moment, absorbing the dramatic turn her life had just taken. 24 hours ago, she had been an invisible custodian afraid to touch the piano. Now she was being offered a position that could restart her musical career and provide financial security for both her and Maria. There is one condition, Elena said finally. What's that? I want to finish out my 2 weeks' notice with the cleaning company. They've been good to me, and I don't want to leave them in a difficult position. Vincent nodded approvingly. That shows character. I respect that. He stood up and extended his hand. So do we have a deal for tonight's performance? Elena shook his hand firmly. We have a deal. The next 2 hours passed in a whirlwind of preparation. Elena met with the catering manager to coordinate her performance timing with the dinner service. She spoke with the sound technician about microphone placement and acoustics. Most importantly, she spent time at the piano, warming up and rehearsing the pieces she planned to perform. As guests began arriving for the dinner, Elena watched from a small anteroom adjacent to the main dining area. She could see men and women in expensive evening wear mingling with cocktails, their conversations filled with the easy confidence that came with wealth and success. These were people accustomed to the finest things in life, and they would expect her performance to meet their sophisticated standards. Elena had changed into a more formal dress that Vincent's assistant had somehow procured for her, an elegant navy blue gown that made her feel like a real performer, rather than a cleaning woman playing dress-up. Her hair was styled in an elegant updo, and she wore makeup that highlighted her natural beauty while projecting professional confidence. As the dinner service concluded and the evening moved toward the entertainment portion, Elena felt her pre-performance nerves beginning to build. It had been years since she had played for an audience this distinguished, and the stakes felt impossibly high. But underneath the nervousness was an excitement she had almost forgotten, the thrill of sharing music with people who would truly appreciate it. Vincent introduced her to the gathering with words that still seemed surreal to Elena's ears. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a very special treat for you this evening. Elena Rodriguez is an extraordinarily talented pianist who will be performing several classical masterpieces for your enjoyment. Elena walked to the piano amid polite applause, her heart pounding but her steps confident. She adjusted the bench slightly and looked out at the audience, seeing faces that were curious, expectant and ready to be impressed. These people had heard the world's finest musicians perform in concert halls and opera houses around the globe. Tonight she would have to prove that she belonged in their company. Elena began with Debussy's Clair de Lune, a piece that would establish the sophisticated, contemplative mood she wanted to create. The opening notes floated across the room like moonlight, immediately capturing the attention of the audience. Elena could sense the shift in the room's energy as conversation stopped and all focus turned toward the music. The Debussy piece showcased Elena's gift for subtle expression and delicate touch. Every note was carefully shaped and placed, creating the impressionistic sound world that made this composer so beloved. Elena felt herself falling into the meditative state that always accompanied her best performances, where technical concerns faded away and she became simply a conduit for the music. When Clair de Lune concluded, the applause was warm and appreciative, with several guests nodding approval to their companions. Elena could see that she had succeeded in capturing their attention and establishing her credibility as a serious musician. For her second piece, Elena chose Mozart's Piano Sonata No. 11 in A major, specifically the famous opening movement with its elegant theme and variations. This was music that would appeal to the classically educated members of her audience while demonstrating her technical precision and stylistic understanding. Elena played the Mozart with crystalline clarity and perfect phrasing, allowing the music's inherent grace and wit to shine through. She could see Vincent watching from the back of the room, his expression showing what appeared to be genuine admiration and perhaps a touch of amazement at the transformation he was witnessing. The Mozart received even stronger applause, and Elena could hear murmurs of appreciation and surprise from the audience. She was winning them over, proving that she deserved to be there not as a novelty or curiosity, but as a legitimate artist. For her final piece, Elena made a bold choice. She had planned to play something safe and conventionally beautiful, but looking out at the engaged faces of her audience, she decided to take a risk. She announced that she would be performing Rachmaninoff's Prelude in C-sharp minor Op. 3 No. 2, one of the most technically demanding and emotionally intense pieces in the piano repertoire. The Rachmaninoff Prelude was a piece that could make or break a performance. It required tremendous technical skill, physical endurance and emotional depth, but it was also a piece that could bring an audience to its feet if performed with conviction and artistry. Elena launched into the Prelude's famous opening chords, their dark and ominous character immediately transforming the atmosphere in the room. This was music of passion and drama, completely different from the elegant restraint of the Mozart or the impressionistic beauty of the Debussy. As the piece unfolded, Elena threw herself into the performance with complete commitment. Her hands flew across the keyboard in the rapid passagework, attacked the dramatic climaxes with power and precision, and caressed the lyrical moments with tender expressiveness. She was no longer thinking about her audience or her nerves or the magnitude of what this performance meant for her future. She was simply living inside the music, letting it flow through her and out into the world. The prelude built to its thunderous conclusion, with Elena bringing every ounce of her technical ability and musical understanding to bear on the final pages. The last chords rang out like thunder, filling the room with sound and leaving a profound silence in their wake. For a moment nobody moved. The audience sat in stunned silence, absorbing what they had just witnessed. Then someone began to clap, and suddenly the entire room erupted in enthusiastic applause. People were standing, smiling, turning to their companions with expressions of amazement and delight. Elena stood and took a bow, feeling tears of joy and relief streaming down her cheeks. She had done it. She had not just performed adequately or competently, but brilliantly. She had reminded everyone in that room, including herself, that she was a true artist with something valuable to offer the world. As the applause continued, Elena saw Dr. Pemberton making his way toward the piano, his face beaming with pride and excitement. Behind him came several other audience members, all eager to congratulate her and express their appreciation for what she had just shared with them. But it was Vincent Blackwood's reaction that meant the most to Elena. He stood at the back of the room, no longer the cold, arrogant executive who had threatened to fire her for touching his piano. Instead, he looked like a man who had just witnessed something extraordinary and was still trying to process what it meant. Their eyes met across the room, and Vincent nodded slowly, a gesture that conveyed respect, admiration, and perhaps a touch of humility. Elena nodded back, understanding that everything between them had changed in the course of 20 minutes at the piano. As the evening wound down and guests began to depart, Elena found herself surrounded by well-wishers and potential opportunities. Business cards were pressed into her hands, invitations extended for future performances, and connections offered that could restart her career at the highest levels. Dr. Pemberton pulled her aside for a private conversation. "Elena, my dear, that was absolutely magnificent. I want you to audition for our upcoming season. We're planning a special concert featuring emerging artists, and you would be perfect." A distinguished woman in an elegant black dress introduced herself as Margaret Chen, director of the Chicago Cultural Foundation. "Miss Rodriguez, we're always looking for talented musicians to feature at our fundraising events. Your performance tonight was exactly what our donors love to hear." A younger man with an earnest expression handed Elena his card and explained that he managed several classical artists and would love to discuss representation with her. "You have the kind of talent that could take you anywhere you want to go," he said sincerely. Elena accepted each card and invitation graciously, her mind spinning with the possibilities that were suddenly opening before her. Just that morning, she had been a night custodian with a secret past. Now she was a pianist with a future full of potential. As the last guests departed and the catering staff began cleaning up, Elena found herself alone with Vincent in the executive lounge. The piano sat silent again, but now it looked different to her. Instead of being a beautiful object she was forbidden to touch, it had become an instrument of her redemption and transformation. "I owe you more than an apology," Vincent said quietly. "I owe you my gratitude. That performance tonight was extraordinary, and it made this dinner exactly the kind of sophisticated, memorable event I was hoping for." The Yamamoto group was particularly impressed. Elena smiled tiredly. "I'm glad it went well. To be honest, I wasn't sure I could still perform at that level." "You performed far above that level. Elena, I want you to know that my job offer stands, but I also understand if you have bigger ambitions now. After tonight, you could probably write your own ticket in the classical music world." Elena considered his words carefully. "I appreciate that, Vincent, and I'm definitely interested in working with Meridian Financial in some capacity. But I think I'd like to explore all my options before making any major decisions. Of course, take all the time you need." Vincent walked to the piano and ran his hand along its polished surface. "You know, this instrument has been sitting here unused for almost 10 years. I had forgotten that it was meant to be played, not just admired. Music is meant to be shared," Elena said softly. "Instruments are like voices, they need to sing to fulfill their purpose." Vincent nodded thoughtfully. "I think I'm beginning to understand that." He turned to face her directly. "Elena, I want you to know that what impressed me most tonight wasn't just your musical ability. It was your courage. It took tremendous bravery to walk in here today and risk everything on your talent." Elena felt a warmth in her chest at his words. Sometimes you have to take risks to find out who you really are. Indeed, Vincent extended his hand once more. "Whatever you decide about your future, I hope you'll remember that you have friends at Meridian Financial, and I promise you that piano will never sit silent again." Elena shook his hand, feeling the weight of new possibilities settling around her like a comfortable cloak. As she prepared to leave the building that had been her workplace for 8 months, she realized that she was walking out as a completely different person than the one who had walked in that morning. The night air was cool against her face as Elena stepped onto the sidewalk outside the Meridian building. The city stretched out before her, full of lights and energy and potential. Somewhere in that urban landscape were concert halls where she might perform, recording studios where she might make albums, and opportunities she had never dared to imagine. Elena pulled out her phone and called Maria, who answered on the second ring despite the late hour. "Elena, how did it go? I've been worried sick about you all evening." "It went well, Maria. Better than well. I think everything is about to change for us." Elena spent the next 20 minutes describing the evening's events to her sister, from the audition through the performance to the opportunities that had emerged. Maria listened with growing excitement and pride, occasionally interrupting with questions or exclamations of amazement. "I can't believe you did it," Maria said when Elena finished her story. "I mean, I can believe it because I know how talented you are, but I can't believe you found the courage to put yourself out there like that." "I almost didn't," Elena admitted. "I was terrified that I'd forgotten how to perform, that I'd embarrass myself in front of all those important people, but you didn't forget. The music was still there waiting for you to find it again." Elena smiled at her sister's words. "Yes, I think it was. And Maria, I want you to know that everything I did, all the sacrifices I made, it was worth it. You're healthy and happy and building a wonderful life for yourself. That's what mattered most." "I know, Elena, and I also know that now it's your turn to build something wonderful. You deserve every good thing that's coming your way." As Elena ended the call and began the journey home, she felt lighter than she had in years. The weight of unfulfilled dreams and suppressed ambitions was lifting from her shoulders, replaced by a sense of possibility and purpose that she had almost forgotten could exist. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and decisions. She would have to evaluate the opportunities that had been offered, decide which direction to take her renewed career, and navigate the complex world of professional classical music. But tonight she was simply a musician who had rediscovered her voice and shared it with the world. The last thing Elena saw as her taxi pulled away from the Meridian building was the light still glowing in the executive lounge 35 floors above the street. Tomorrow other musicians might sit at that beautiful Steinway and fill the air with their own interpretations of beauty and meaning. The piano would sing again, as it was meant to do, and Elena had played a part in awakening it from its long silence. As Elena settled back in her seat and watched the city pass by outside the window, she realized that her story was far from over. In fact, in many ways it was just beginning. The girl who had once dreamed of concert halls and international stages had grown into a woman who understood sacrifice and resilience, and the true value of pursuing one's passion. Now she had the chance to combine that wisdom with her rediscovered talent and create something even more meaningful than what she had originally planned. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in years Elena Rodriguez was excited to find out what it would bring. 3 months later, Elena stood backstage at Symphony Center, adjusting the elegant burgundy gown that Margaret Chen had insisted she wear for tonight's performance. The Chicago Cultural Foundation's annual gala was one of the most prestigious musical events in the city, and Elena was the featured soloist performing Grieg's Piano Concerto in A minor with the Chicago Symphony Orchestra. The transformation in her life had been nothing short of miraculous. Within weeks of that fateful evening at Meridian Financial, Elena had been swept into a whirlwind of auditions, meetings and opportunities that had completely rewritten her future. Dr. Pemberton had been true to his word, offering her not just one audition but several performance opportunities with the symphony. Margaret Chen had become both a mentor and advocate, connecting Elena with donors and patrons who were eager to support a talented artist with such a compelling personal story. Elena's phone buzzed with a text message from Maria, who was somewhere in the audience with her boyfriend and several friends from Northwestern. "Break a leg, sis. We're all so proud of you. Mom and Dad would be over the moon right now." The mention of their parents brought tears to Elena's eyes, but they were tears of joy rather than sadness. She had learned to carry their memory as inspiration rather than burden, knowing they would have wanted her to pursue her dreams with courage and determination. Vincent Blackwood was also in the audience tonight, along with several clients from Meridian Financial. Their working relationship had evolved into something Elena had never expected, a genuine partnership based on mutual respect and shared vision. Vincent had proven to be more than just a successful businessman. He was someone who appreciated artistic excellence and understood its value in ways that went beyond mere entertainment. Elena had accepted a consulting position with Meridian Financial that allowed her to curate musical programming for their events while pursuing her own performance career. The arrangement provided financial stability without constraining her artistic ambitions, and Vincent had become an unlikely but valuable ally in navigating the complex world of classical music patronage. The sound of the orchestra tuning their instruments filtered backstage, and Elena felt the familiar pre-performance mixture of excitement and nerves building in her chest. But these were good nerves, the kind that sharpened her focus and heightened her awareness rather than paralyzing her with fear. Elena thought back to that terrifying evening 3 months ago, when she had walked into Vincent's office wearing her simple black dress and carrying nothing but hope and determination. She had been a custodian then, invisible and dismissed, cleaning around beautiful things without being able to touch them. Tonight she was the artist that hundreds of people had come to hear, the musician whose interpretation would bring one of the greatest piano concertos to life. The journey between those two moments had been intense and sometimes overwhelming. Elena had worked with a vocal coach to improve her stage presence, spent countless hours practicing with various orchestras to rebuild her ensemble skills, and studied with a master teacher to polish her technique and expand her repertoire. She had also learned to navigate the business side of music, understanding contracts and negotiations, and the delicate politics of arts organizations. Most importantly, Elena had learned to trust herself again. The frightened woman who had been afraid to touch the piano keys had been replaced by an artist who understood her own worth and refused to accept anything less than the respect she deserved. A knock on the dressing room door interrupted her thoughts. "Miss Rodriguez, 5 minutes to places." Elena took a deep breath and made her way to the stage entrance. Through the wings she could see the packed concert hall, over 2,000 people who had come to experience the magic of live classical music. The lights were dimmed and the orchestra was in position, waiting for her entrance. Maestro Chen, Margaret's brother and the evening's conductor, appeared beside her with an encouraging smile. "Ready, Elena? This is going to be magnificent." Elena nodded, feeling the last of her nerves transform into pure anticipation. She had prepared for this moment her entire life, even during the years when it seemed impossible that it would ever come. As she walked onto the stage, the applause was warm and welcoming. Elena took her place at the beautiful concert grand piano, the same model Steinway she had learned to love during her months of secret practice in the Meridian building. She adjusted the bench and looked out at the audience, finding familiar faces among the sea of expectant expressions. There was Vincent in the 5th row, no longer the cold executive who had threatened to fire her for touching his piano. Beside him sat Dr. Pemberton, who had become both mentor and friend. Margaret Chen beamed at her from the front section, surrounded by the patrons and supporters who had made tonight's performance possible. Most importantly, Elena spotted Maria in the balcony, her sister's face glowing with pride and joy. Maria had been Elena's anchor during the darkest years, the reason she had found the strength to sacrifice her dreams for something more important. Now Maria was witnessing the resurrection of those dreams, transformed by experience and hardship into something deeper and more meaningful than they had been before. The Grieg concerto began with the orchestra's dramatic opening, the powerful chords that announced the piano's entrance. Elena felt her body respond to the familiar rhythms, her hands poised above the keyboard as she prepared to join the musical conversation. When her moment came, Elena's hands descended to the keys with perfect confidence. The opening cascade of notes flowed from the piano like water, each one precisely placed and beautifully voiced. This was music she had studied in college, but never performed with orchestra, and feeling it come alive under her fingers was an indescribable joy. As the concerto unfolded, Elena lost herself completely in the music. She was no longer thinking about the audience, or the stakes, or the remarkable journey that had brought her to this moment. She was simply a musician doing what she was born to do, translating the composer's vision into sound and sharing it with people who understood its beauty and power. The dialogue between piano and orchestra was exhilarating, each section building on the others to create something greater than the sum of its parts. Elena's technique was flawless, but more importantly, her musical interpretation was deeply personal and emotionally compelling. She brought her own story to the music, her understanding of sacrifice and resilience, and the courage required to pursue one's deepest calling. During the concerto's lyrical second movement, Elena played with a tenderness that brought tears to many eyes in the audience. This was music about longing and beauty, and the human capacity for hope, themes that resonated powerfully with her own experience. She could see people in the audience leaning forward, completely absorbed in the musical narrative she was weaving. The final movement was a celebration of technical brilliance and joyful energy. Elena's fingers flew across the keyboard in the rapid passages, her whole body moving with the rhythm and excitement of the music. She felt strong and confident and completely alive, channeling years of suppressed artistic energy into every phrase and gesture. As the concerto built toward its triumphant conclusion, Elena and the orchestra moved together like a single instrument. The final chords rang out with power and conviction, filling the vast concert hall with glorious sound before fading into profound silence. For a moment nobody moved. The audience sat in stunned appreciation of what they had just experienced. Then someone began to clap, and suddenly the entire hall erupted in thunderous applause. People were standing, cheering, calling out their appreciation for a performance that had clearly moved them deeply. Elena stood and took her bow, feeling overwhelmed by the response. This was what she had dreamed of as a young music student, but the reality was more powerful and meaningful than anything she could have imagined. She had not just performed a concerto, she had shared her story, her heart, her entire artistic being with 2,000 strangers who had become fellow travelers on a musical journey. The applause continued for several minutes, with multiple curtain calls and bouquets of flowers presented by smiling patrons. Elena could see Vincent on his feet, applauding with genuine enthusiasm and what appeared to be deep respect. Dr. Pemberton was wiping tears from his eyes, clearly moved by what he had witnessed. Margaret Chen was beaming with the satisfaction of someone whose instincts about artistic talent had been completely vindicated. As the evening wound down and Elena made her way to the reception, she was surrounded by congratulations and praise from audience members, fellow musicians and representatives from various arts organizations. Business cards were exchanged, future collaborations discussed, and invitations extended for performances across the country and beyond. But the moment that meant the most to Elena came when Maria fought through the crowd to embrace her sister, both of them crying tears of joy and overwhelming emotion. "Elena, that was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard in my life," Maria whispered. "I'm so sorry you had to give up music for so long, but I'm also grateful because it made tonight even more special. You didn't just play that concerto, you lived it." Elena held her sister tightly, thinking about the long journey that had brought them both to this moment. The sacrifice had been worth it, not just because Maria was healthy and thriving, but because the experience had taught Elena things about herself and about music that she never could have learned any other way. Vincent approached them as the sisters separated, his expression showing a mixture of pride and humility that Elena had never seen from him before. "Elena, that was extraordinary. I've attended hundreds of classical music performances over the years, but I've never been moved the way I was tonight." He paused, seeming to search for the right words. "I want to apologize again for how I treated you when we first met. I made assumptions based on prejudice and ignorance, and I nearly missed the opportunity to witness something truly special. Elena smiled at him warmly. Vincent, we all make assumptions about people. What matters is what we do when we realize we were wrong. You didn't just apologize, you helped make tonight possible. I'm just glad I was smart enough to recognize talent when it finally demanded to be seen, Vincent replied. Speaking of which, I have some friends from the Vienna Philharmonic who are very interested in meeting you. Apparently word about tonight's performance has already reached certain circles in Europe. Elena felt her heart skip a beat. The Vienna Philharmonic represented the pinnacle of classical music achievement, an opportunity she had never dared to dream about even in her most ambitious moments. Dr. Pemberton joined their conversation, his face still glowing with excitement. Elena, my dear, I've just spoken with the artistic director of the Ravinia Festival. They want you to be their featured soloist next summer, and that's just the beginning. I suspect your calendar is about to become very full. As the evening progressed, Elena found herself in conversation with musicians, conductors, and arts administrators from around the world. The performance had clearly established her as a serious artist worthy of international attention, and the opportunities being discussed were beyond anything she had imagined possible just a few months earlier. But even as Elena navigated these exciting conversations and possibilities, she remained grounded in the values and experiences that had shaped her journey. She thought about the night she had spent cleaning offices, the fear and uncertainty she had felt when Maria was sick, the moment of courage that had led her to call Vincent and risk everything on her talent. Those experiences had not been obstacles to overcome, they had been essential parts of her education as both a musician and a human being. They had taught her empathy, resilience, and the true value of pursuing one's calling, even when the path seemed impossible. As the reception finally wound down and Elena prepared to leave Symphony Center, she found herself standing alone for a moment in the empty concert hall. The stage was being cleared by the crew, but the piano remained in place, silent now but somehow still resonating with the music that had flowed from it just hours earlier. Elena walked back onto the stage and placed her hands gently on the piano's fallboard, the same gesture she had made countless times during her months of cleaning around the instrument at Meridian Financial, but now the gesture held completely different meaning. Instead of longing and loss, it represented fulfillment and possibility. Maria appeared beside her, linking their arms together as they looked out at the empty seats that had held so many appreciative listeners. "What are you thinking about?" Maria asked softly. "I'm thinking about how strange life is," Elena replied. 3 months ago I was afraid to touch a piano because I thought I wasn't worthy of making music anymore. Tonight I played one of the greatest concertos ever written with one of the world's finest orchestras. Sometimes I feel like I'm living someone else's life. No, Elena, you're living your own life finally. The life you were always meant to live, just taking a different path to get there. Elena nodded, understanding the truth in her sister's words. Her story had not unfolded the way she had originally planned, but perhaps that was for the best. The young woman who had left the conservatory with such confidence and ambition had been talented but untested. The woman who had performed tonight possessed not just technical skill but emotional depth, resilience, and a profound understanding of what music could mean to people who needed beauty and hope in their lives. As Elena and Maria left the concert hall and stepped out into the cool Chicago night, Elena felt a sense of completion and beginning simultaneously. One chapter of her story had ended with tonight's triumph, but she could sense that many more chapters lay ahead, filled with music and possibility, and the continued journey of becoming the artist and person she was meant to be. The city lights sparkled around them as they walked toward the car that would take them home. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, decisions about which offers to accept and which directions to pursue. But tonight, Elena Rodriguez was simply a musician who had rediscovered her voice and shared it with the world, transforming not just her own life, but touching the hearts of everyone who had been privileged to listen. The piano in the Meridian Financial Building would sing again at future events, but it would never be the same instrument that had sat silent for so many years. Like Elena herself, it had been awakened to its true purpose, and neither of them would ever be silent again. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.